People in California felt it, and they weren't even in Nevada. That is how significant this earthquake was. A magnitude 5.7 struck Nevada, and the shaking traveled hundreds of kilometers across state lines, into California, into homes, into office buildings, into the bodies of people who had no idea what was happening beneath their feet. And I have to say, when I looked up where this event ranks in Nevada's seismic history, I had to check the number twice. 7th largest earthquake in Nevada in 60 years. 60 years of recorded seismic history in one of the most geologically active states in the American West. And this event just entered the top 7. Now, I know what some people are thinking. Magnitude 5.7. That doesn't sound massive, right? You hear about magnitude 7s and 8s on this channel regularly. You hear about megathrust earthquakes capable of generating Pacific-wide tsunamis. So a 5.7 in Nevada, why does it matter? Stay with me. Because the answer to that question is not about this earthquake alone. It is about what this earthquake tells us about the ground beneath Nevada and California right now. It is about the fault system this event occurred on, and what that fault system connects to. It is about the historical record of Nevada seismicity and what the past tells us about what tends to follow events like this. And it is about a geological structure called the Basin and Range Province that most people have never heard of, but that is doing something right now that deserves serious attention. Stay with me through this entire video, because what looks like a regional earthquake story becomes something much larger the deeper you go. So let's start with the event itself, the fresh data first. The magnitude 5.7 earthquake struck Nevada with a depth placing it in the shallow crustal category. Shallow earthquakes, as I have explained in previous videos on this channel, are the ones that do the most damage, the ones that shake hardest at the surface. Because the energy does not have kilometers of rock to dissipate through before it reaches buildings and roads and people. Shallow, energetic, and widely felt. USGS ShakeMap data showed felt reports streaming in from across Nevada immediately after the event. Reno, Las Vegas, depending on location relative to the epicenter, Carson City, rural communities across the state. And then the reports started coming in from California, from communities across the eastern Sierra Nevada region, from the greater Sacramento area, from the Bay Area in some accounts. When a magnitude 5.7 is felt across that geographic footprint, that tells you something important about the energy release and the geological medium it traveled through. The Great Basin, the geological province that covers most of Nevada and extends into Utah, Oregon, Idaho, and California, is one of the most seismically active regions in the continental United States. But it is not active in the way most people think about earthquake zones. It is not a single locked megathrust fault like Cascadia building toward a catastrophic release. It is something different, something more distributed, and in some ways more complex. Further into this video, I am going to explain exactly what the Basin and Range Province is doing geologically right now. I am going to show you what the historical record of Nevada earthquakes tells us about patterns of seismic activity in this region. And I am going to explain why a magnitude 5.7 that ranks 7th in 60 years of Nevada seismic history is a more significant data point than its number alone suggests. Because context is everything in seismology. And the context here is extraordinary. So let me take you back through history first, because I did the research. And what I found in Nevada's seismic record should be known by everyone living in this region. Nevada has a seismic history that most people dramatically underestimate. The largest earthquake in Nevada's recorded history was the magnitude 7.3 Pleasant Valley earthquake of October 2nd, 1915, over a century ago, but still within the living memory of the modern geological record. That earthquake produced surface rupture extending for nearly 60 kilometers, nearly 40 miles of visible fault scarps appearing on the surface, ground cracking open, visible from the air as fresh linear features cutting across the landscape. A magnitude 7.3 in Nevada. Then the Cedar Mountain earthquake of December 1932, magnitude 7.2, another massive event in central Nevada, again producing significant surface rupture. Then the Excelsior Mountains earthquake sequence in 1934, the Fallon-Stillwater earthquake sequence in 1954, a remarkable sequence that included multiple magnitude 6+ events over several months, the Rainbow Mountain earthquakes, the Stillwater earthquakes, the Fairview Peak earthquake reaching magnitude 7.2, all within a single year, 1954. Nevada shaking repeatedly with some of the largest continental earthquakes recorded in the American West. And then the Hebgen Lake earthquake of 1959 in Montana just north of Yellowstone, magnitude 7.3, killing 28 people, triggering massive landslides, damming the Madison River, creating a new lake in hours. These are the events that populate Nevada and the broader basin and range seismic record in the decades before our current 60-year window. A region with magnitude 7 earthquakes in its historical record, currently experiencing its 7th largest earthquake in 60 years, and feeling it across 2 states. That is the context. Now let me explain what is actually happening geologically beneath Nevada, because this is the part that makes everything else make sense. The Basin and Range Province. I want you to picture this. The western United States, from roughly the Sierra Nevada in California to the Wasatch Front in Utah, and from southern Idaho down into northern Mexico, is being pulled apart right now. The crust is literally being stretched, extended, thinned, like a piece of taffy being pulled from both ends. And as that crust stretches, it breaks, it fractures, along roughly parallel north-south trending normal faults. And between those faults, blocks of crust drop down forming basins, while adjacent blocks stay higher forming ranges. Basin, range, basin, range, basin, range, over and over, across hundreds of kilometers of Western America. That topographic pattern you see when you fly over Nevada, the parallel mountain ranges separated by flat valleys, Las Vegas Valley, the Reno Basin, the Carson Sink. That is not random geography. That is the direct surface expression of a crust being pulled apart at depth. And that extension, that stretching, is still happening today. GPS measurements across the basin and range show the region extending at a rate of roughly 1 to 2 centimeters per year. Centimeters per year. The crust of Nevada is getting wider, slowly, continuously, driven by forces in the deep mantle and by the interaction between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate to the west. And all of that extension has to be accommodated somewhere. On faults, through earthquakes, through the gradual or sometimes sudden movement of crustal blocks relative to each other. Nevada is full of active faults. The Nevada Bureau of Mines and Geology maps hundreds of them, many capable of producing magnitude 6 and 7 earthquakes. And unlike California with the San Andreas as a single dominant structure, Nevada's seismic hazard is distributed, spread across a vast network of faults, many of which have long recurrence intervals, meaning they do not rupture frequently, which means when they do rupture, they have accumulated significant strain. Long recurrence intervals, high accumulated strain, and then a sudden release. That is the basin and range hazard model. And right now, a magnitude 5.7, the 7th largest earthquake in 60 years of Nevada seismic history, has just released energy on part of that system. I want to tell you about something I found when I looked deeper into the specific fault environment around this event, because it connects to a broader seismological picture that I think is critical. Nevada's seismicity does not happen randomly distributed across the state. It clusters, it concentrates in specific seismogenic zones where the extensional faulting is most active, where the crust is thinnest, where the geothermal gradient is highest, meaning where the deep heat from the mantle is closest to the surface. Western Nevada in particular, the region around Reno, the Walker Lane, running northwest to southeast across western Nevada and into California, is one of the most seismically active zones in the state. And the Walker Lane is not just a Nevada feature. It is a major right lateral shear zone, accommodating a significant fraction of the relative motion between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, a fraction that does not make it onto the San Andreas fault system in California, up to 25% of the total Pacific North American plate boundary motion that in California goes on to the San Andreas system. In Nevada is distributed across the Walker Lane. Let that sink in. A quarter of the total force driving earthquakes in California is also driving seismicity in western Nevada. And the Walker Lane is directly connected to major fault systems in California: the Owens Valley Fault, the Eastern California Shear Zone, the Garlock Fault, the faults of the Eastern Sierra Nevada Front. When western Nevada shakes, the system it is shaking on is connected to California's fault network, and California felt this earthquake. Now I want to talk about the depth, because depth is everything in earthquake hazard, and I have some specific things to say about what the depth of this event tells us. Shallow crustal earthquakes in the basin and range, the kind Nevada experiences, typically occur in the upper 15 to 20 kilometers of crust, the brittle upper crust where rock fractures rather than flows under stress. Below that depth, the crust becomes ductile. It deforms plastically, without the sudden brittle failure that produces earthquakes. The magnitude 5.7 occurring in that shallow brittle zone means maximum energy delivery to the surface, maximum felt shaking per unit of magnitude, and maximum potential for aftershock sequences developing on the ruptured fault and on adjacent fault segments that experienced stress changes from the main shock. That aftershock potential is something I want to address directly. Empirical seismology, the statistical analysis of earthquake sequences, tells us that a magnitude 5.7 main shock will typically be followed by aftershocks. The largest expected aftershock. Based on Both's law, a relationship established by the Swedish seismologist Marcus Both is approximately magnitude 4.7, one full magnitude unit below the main shock. But Both's law gives you the average, the expected value. Sequences do not always follow the average. Some sequences produce aftershocks closer in size to the main shock than expected. And in tectonically complex environments like the basin and range, where multiple faults exist in close proximity, a main shock on one fault can bring adjacent faults closer to their own failure thresholds through static stress transfer. We saw this in the 1954 Nevada sequence I mentioned earlier, where multiple magnitude 6+ events occurred over several months, with each event potentially influencing the timing and location of subsequent ones. The question that seismologists are now asking about the current magnitude 5.7 sequence is whether this is a standalone event, followed by a normal aftershock decay sequence, or whether it is part of the beginning of a more extended sequence. That question cannot be answered definitively in real time. It requires watching the aftershock pattern, watching whether activity decays as expected following Omori's law, the empirical relationship describing how aftershock rates decrease with time after a main shock, or whether the rate of aftershocks stays elevated, suggesting that the fault system is in a more broadly disturbed state. And here is what I found in the research that I think provides the most important historical context for this moment. The Nevada seismic record contains several examples of what seismologists call earthquake sequences with delayed major events, where an initial significant earthquake was followed weeks to months later by a larger event on an adjacent or connected fault. The 1954 Nevada sequence is the most dramatic example, but researchers studying the spatial and temporal patterns of basin and range seismicity have documented other cases, less well known, of moderate earthquakes acting as stress triggers for subsequent larger events on connected fault segments. Now, I am not saying the magnitude 5.7 is a foreshock. I cannot say that. Nobody can identify a foreshock as such in real time. You only know it was a foreshock after a larger event follows. And most moderate earthquakes are not foreshocks. They are main shocks followed by aftershocks. But the magnitude 5.7 ranking 7th in 60 years of Nevada history means the region around this event has experienced relatively few comparable earthquakes in the modern monitoring era. That low frequency of comparable events, combined with the extensional tectonic setting, where strain can accumulate over long periods on individual faults, means that adjacent fault segments in the region may carry significant unrelieved stress. Static stress transfer from the magnitude 5.7, The increase in stress imposed on nearby fault segments by the main shock is a real and calculable effect. USGS Coulomb stress modeling tools exist precisely to estimate these stress changes. And in a region with the fault density of Western Nevada, multiple fault segments will have experienced calculable stress increases from this event. The Nevada Seismological Laboratory at the University of Nevada, Reno, which operates the monitoring network across the state, will be analyzing exactly these stress transfer patterns right now, watching the aftershock locations, watching which faults they are occurring on, and assessing whether any adjacent segments are showing signs of increased activity. That work is happening as I record this video. And I want to tell you what they are specifically looking for, because the geography of this event matters enormously. Western Nevada and Eastern California form a continuous geological system, the Walker Lane extending into the Eastern California shear zone. The extensional basin and range structure giving way to the strike-slip dominated environment of the California fault system as you move west. Some of the most significant earthquake sequences in California history have involved events that began in the Nevada-California border region or the eastern Sierra Nevada. The 1872 Owens Valley earthquake, magnitude estimated at 7.4 to 7.9, the largest historical earthquake in California south of San Francisco, occurred along the eastern Sierra Nevada front, the border between the Basin and Range and the Sierra Nevada block, directly in the geological system connected to Western Nevada's active faults. That earthquake occurred in a region that today is home to the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the primary water supply for Southern California, running through Owens Valley for hundreds of kilometers, along the base of the Sierra Escarpment, directly above the fault that produced the 1872 event. A repeat of the 1872 Owens Valley earthquake today, on the same fault system that is geologically connected to Western Nevada's current seismic activity, would threaten Southern California's water supply infrastructure, along with communities throughout the Owens Valley and Inland Empire regions. I am not predicting that scenario. The probability of any specific fault rupturing at any specific time cannot be stated with scientific confidence. That is the honest answer. Always. But the geological connection is real. The infrastructure exposure is real. And the fact that a magnitude 5.7 just ranked 7th in 60 years of Nevada seismic history in this connected fault system is a data point worth understanding fully. Now let me talk about what makes this earthquake significant from a pure ground motion perspective. Because the felt reports coming in from California tell us something important about energy propagation in this region. When seismic waves travel through different types of rock and sediment, they behave differently. Hard crystalline rock, like the granite of the Sierra Nevada, transmits seismic energy efficiently, but with relatively fast wave speeds. Loose basin sediments, the alluvial fill that covers the floors of Nevada's basins, amplify seismic waves dramatically, slow them down, increase their amplitude, make the shaking feel more intense and last longer than it would on hard rock. The communities most exposed to amplified shaking from Nevada earthquakes are precisely the ones built on basin fill. Reno sits on the floor of the Truckee Meadows Basin, alluvial sediment over bedrock, a natural amplifier. Las Vegas sits on thick alluvial fill in the Las Vegas Valley, another amplifier, and many of California's Central Valley communities, sitting on deep sedimentary fill of the Great Valley, can experience amplified shaking from distant events. The felt reports from California after the magnitude 5.7 are consistent with this amplification effect. The shaking reaching California was not just a function of the earthquake's magnitude. It was a function of the efficient propagation of seismic energy through the crystalline rock of the Basin and Range and Sierra Nevada, and then the amplification of that energy in California's sedimentary basins. And now I want to go back to the historical record one more time, because I found something that I think is the most important contextual piece for understanding where Nevada's seismicity currently stands. Research published by seismologists at the University of Nevada, Reno and USGS examining the long-term earthquake record across the basin and range, has documented what they describe as temporal clustering of major seismic sequences. Periods of elevated regional seismic activity, where multiple significant earthquakes occur across the region within a compressed time frame, separated by longer periods of relative quiescence. The period from roughly 1903 to 1959 was one of the most seismically active in Nevada's recorded history. Multiple magnitude 7 earthquakes, numerous magnitude 6 sequences, broad regional activation across the basin and range, then a relative quiet period, followed by the more moderate activity of recent decades, with the current moment showing a magnitude 5.7, ranking as the 7th largest in 60 years. Are we at the beginning of a new active period in the basin and range seismic cycle? A new cluster of elevated activity analogous to the early to mid 20th century sequence? The honest scientific answer is we do not know. The temporal clustering behavior of basin and range seismicity is documented, but the triggering mechanisms and predictive value of that clustering are still areas of active research. What drives the system from a quiet period into an active one is not fully understood. Possible factors include stress redistribution from distant large earthquakes, changes in groundwater loading and unloading, slow adjustments in deep crustal stress from ongoing tectonic extension, and potentially external forcing factors that are still being investigated. What we do know is that the magnitude 5.7 is a real signal from a real active fault system, that it was large enough to rank 7th in 60 years, that it was felt across 2 states, and that it occurred in a geological environment with a historical record of much larger events on connected fault systems. The Nevada Seismological Laboratory is watching. The USGS is watching. And the aftershock sequence developing around this event is being analyzed in real time. So what should you do if you live in Nevada, or in Eastern California, or in any of the regions that felt this earthquake? First, understand your shaking hazard. USGS hazard maps for Nevada and California are publicly available. They show the probability of significant ground motion at any location based on the known fault inventory and historical seismicity. If your home or workplace sits in a high hazard zone, that information should drive decisions about building retrofits, about emergency preparedness, about the structural integrity of older, unreinforced masonry buildings that are disproportionately dangerous in moderate earthquakes. Second, have a preparedness plan. The difference between a moderate earthquake being a scary experience and a life-threatening one is often preparation. Water, emergency food, a go bag, knowing where gas shutoffs are, knowing how to drop cover and hold on during shaking. Third, for the coming days and weeks, be aware that aftershocks are expected and normal. They can be disorienting, alarming, and in some cases strong enough to cause additional damage to structures already weakened by the main shock. If you feel significant shaking, do not re-enter a damaged building until it has been inspected. And fourth, pay attention to what happens next in the seismicity pattern, not with fear, but with informed awareness. If aftershock rates stay elevated rather than decaying, if larger events follow, those are signals that the fault system in the region is in an active state. The Nevada Seismological Laboratory posts real-time earthquake data. USGS Earthquake Hazards Program does too. These are public resources, free to access, and more informative than any news headline, because the ground beneath Nevada is not static. It is moving. It is stretching. It is accommodating the slow, relentless collision and interaction of tectonic plates thousands of kilometers to the west. And every earthquake, from the smallest tremor to the largest historical events, is part of that process. The magnitude 5.7 that just ranked 7th in 60 years is the ground reminding us of that. California felt it, and California, sitting on the western edge of this connected fault system, with its own critically stressed faults, with the San Andreas, with the Hayward, with the Cascadia zone to the north, should feel it not just as vibration, but as information. Information about a geological system that is active, dynamic, and communicating its state through every earthquake it produces. I will stay on the pulse of this sequence for you. If significant aftershocks develop, if the pattern changes, if USGS or the Nevada Seismological Laboratory issues updated assessments, you will hear about it here. Check out the end screen. I have linked the video on the Ring of Fire being in overdrive, because what is happening in Nevada does not exist in isolation. It exists in the context of an elevated planetary seismic period that this channel has been tracking across multiple videos. If you are new here, subscribe, click the notification bell. This channel connects the regional stories to the global picture. Coffee link in the description to support the work. No sponsors, no brand deals, just the research and the analysis. Thank you guys. Stay safe, be aware, look up, look down, look left, look right, anywhere basically. Bye-bye.